Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to Crashes and Taxes, everybody. I am your host for this podcast, Rebecca Walser, and I'm so excited that you are with us. And we are doing this again as a video recording as well. So if you care to see me and see the office, watch the video. Otherwise, stay with me on your headphones or your pods. And although I don't recommend keeping the pods in for so long, it's a soft tissue study done on the Apple pods and the radiation that's being picked up in the soft tissue of the ear canal, and I just will leave it at that. So do some research on that for yourself. I want to talk to you today about when should we buy out the government. It's like going into a partnership with somebody and you think that the terms are going to be one way, and so you agree to them and you go into business with them and you start building your business with them and things start going well and you start getting good at what you're doing, and then 20 years later down the road you realize, wow, we're just really going in different directions and we want to get and buy out this person. We want to buy out this owner of the business. And so you sit down and you figure out, all right, what is it going to take to buy you out and to get you to extract yourself from ownership and activity with this business, and we will move on and you will move on with your buyout and have a nice life. And that happens all the time. I work with clients all the time that are literally in the process of divesting a specific person or entity from a joint venture, a joint business, and this is very, very common. But it's actually a lot more common than we even think it is, because it happens pretty much with every American. And it's happened in full spectrum. The brunt of the country does this. The brunt of the country accepts this as what we call conventional wisdom. And that is that we decide, since really the 80s, we've gone into the business of building our retirement alongside the government. And I'm not just talking about their part of Social Security and the fact that they're going to be a part of your life and your planning for the rest of your life as an American, because Social Security and Medicare play such an integral and important role for those that are retired. I'm not talking about Social Security or Medicare at all. I'm talking about the shift that happened when we used to be, if I can take you back to the 60s, the 70s, it used to be, even the 80s, beginning of the 80s, used to be, middle of the 80s, used to be that you would go work for a company and you would work there for 30 years. You would have a long career with one company. So I hope you liked that job when you started it, because you weren't going to be moving. And the reason people didn't move is because they had a pension. And in order for a pension to be paid, you had to be at that company for so many years. I mean, that was how it worked, right? You gave basically your working career to one company, and they rewarded you by paying you for the rest of your life, usually about anywhere from 75 to 85% of your pre-retirement income. Lots of people are in the 70s, but somewhere in that range, 70 to 80+% of your pre-retirement income was what they would guarantee to pay you through your death. And then, of course, on top of that, whatever we had put away as a savings, we would be able to spend, and then we would come back around with Social Security and we'd pick up Medicare, and we would be set. We would have savings, pension, and Social Security, and this would be sort of the three tiers, if you will, to our retirement strategy. And this worked for Americans for many, 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 many years. But then some things started to change. Specifically, we started to get hyperinflation when we came off the gold standard under Richard Nixon. So we had already started coming off it. Even under FDR in wartime, we were using debt and financing. Even though we were on the gold standard in the 30s, we were using debt to help us finance war. So every country in the world through a wartime period, even if they had a currency standard, they were able to borrow and for war purposes. So we had a little bit of debt, but just to give you a perspective, by the time Ronald Reagan in 1980 was in office for his first year, in October of 1981, we hit or was it October of 80? Don't quote me, it's either 80 or 81. We hit $1 trillion the first year Ronald Reagan was president, in October of his first year as president. That's when we first hit $1 trillion of debt. We didn't even have $1 trillion of debt when Reagan entered office. That's how little debt we had as a country in the early 80s. Okay, so Ronald Reagan had been an actor in California. And in his autobiography, he basically tells a story how when he was acting in California, he wouldn't make more than 2 films a year. He called them pictures, 2 pictures a year, because by the time he made the third one, he would be getting paid 6 cents on the dollar. And that was a combination of the then federal tax rate and the California state tax rate, because he was California. He obviously lived in California, was California governor, and then all of those things. So that burned, I think, an impression on him when he was working, and said, there's got to be something wrong with this system, that somebody like me who could produce more and earn more doesn't, because taxes are too high. In other words, it's not worth my time to get paid 6 cents on the dollar and 94 cents to go to the government, so I just won't get paid the 6 cents, and the government's not going to get paid 94 cents. And that's called economic decision, folks. We have the freedom. If it costs you more to work than your time is worth, then don't work. A lot of us have figured that one out. So Ronald Reagan went into office with hardly any debt, as we've already discussed. We came off the gold standard under Nixon before him. And what happened was he was severely impacted by taxes, that we just gave you the story. And so in his second term, he made it a very important point to go ahead and do tax strategy. And so if you go back to 1985 and 86, you'll see that in 1985, we had the top earned income tax rate was 50%. So it was high, but it wasn't, that high considering the fact that it had been as high as 94% in 1944. So it was 50%. The top tax rate, though, on passive earnings was 70%. So we had a 50% active and a 70% passive tax rate. And that's what it was. And so Reagan wanted to implement tax reform. And Reagan's idea, as everyone knows, has been very greatly attributed to trickle-down economics. In other words, if we cut regulation and cut taxes, and we let the American ingenuity be birthed and come to fruition, we will have more taxpayers with better incomes because they have been fulfilled and for pursuing their ability to generate income. And that's kind of coming from his philosophy, as what we talked about with him being an actor. So in 1986, the Congress did pass a tax cut, and they cut the top rate on both earning and passive from 50 and 70 respectively to 28%. So you can see it was a huge tax cut. To put that tax cut into perspective, we hadn't had taxes that low. This is now in 1987 that the 28% tax rate goes into effect from Reagan's 86 reform. If you look back from 87, we had not had a top rate as low as it was under Ronald Reagan, again 28%, all the way back from 1987 all the way to 1930 under FDR. You have to go back to 1930 to where you can find a 25% rate again. And I have to understand that was only 17 years into the tax code, because the tax code didn't come around until 1912, 1913. So you can see that 17 years into the tax code, we did have a 25% tax under FDR in the 30s. As the war came, this World War II, we basically raised taxes. That top rate was 94%. That is still the record for our top tax rate ever, and that was in 1944 at the end of World War II. So the bottom line is we were on a gold standard. We weren't spending debt. Reagan started into office with less than $1 trillion of federal debt. And in the beginning of his second term, he cut the top tax rate. Now, what he did that was genius, and I think this is going to happen again. But what Reagan did was he said, all right, I'm cutting the tax rate so much that clearly I have to force a lot more people into the higher bracket. So he basically said, all right, yeah, we're cutting the rate to 28%, but if you make over $28,000, you're going to be in the top rate. So he narrowed the bracket so that you fell into the top rate, which was low, much sooner than previously before. You would have to be making substantial amount of money to be in the top bracket. Reagan did the opposite. And basically, if you started making over 28, you were in the top bracket of 28%. So what happened? We cut these tax rates, but we did not slow down our spending. So if you fast forward from that time period in 1987, from the federal debt in 1987, and you fast forward to present day 2021, we have $28 trillion of federal debt as we speak, but we haven't even spent all of the allocation that we made for coronavirus already under Donald Trump's stimulus packages, and now we know that Biden is looking at another $1.9 trillion. So we are looking at very soon a $30 trillion debt federally that has been accumulated since the history of the public, and yet our tax rates right now, the top tax rate under Trump is 37. So it has only crept up 9% at the top end since the 1980s. Now, that's not to say that that's been, Trump cut the tax rate. We were at almost 40% as the top rate, and effectively 43% when you add in the Obamacare additives. So Obamacare has the NIIT, the net investment income tax that applies, and there's a couple of other additives. There's some Medicare surcharges. So basically, by the time you're all in at the top rate, you're about 43% under Obama. Trump cut it to 37. We still have the Obamacare add-ons. So I say all that to tell you that the tax policy of Reagan, and you don't know how much of it is tax policy and how much of it is increased spending, because certainly we have increased our spending since the 80s vastly. I mean, if you look at the federal budget per capita back in the 80s to today, you're going to see a big uptick in government spending. And this is where the country has been drifting towards more socialistic policies, more government provided versus privately provided and individual responsibility. If you want to talk just socialism and capitalism for a second, just think in general terms of capitalism is an individualism, and what that means is you have individual rights and you have an individual responsibility to make your way in life, and that gives you a ceiling of nothing. The sky is your limit, but if you have no motivation and you don't want to work, capitalism isn't going to be a great system. On the socialistic side, if you are capitalistic and individualistic and you want to go out and make the next Tesla, car company, it's going to be a lot more hard because socialism is a lot more of government ownership, less, private ownership, a lot more focus on the community, the collective. Everything is together. We own it together. It's ours together. It's our country together. It's just much more of a community collective, which is why there's a lot less private ownership and private responsibility and individualism. Individual rights get diminished as society becomes more and more socialistic, and that we know is happening now, even as we speak, with all of the censorship that we're seeing at the corporate level that, of course, is being encouraged by the people that are in charge of the government right now federally. So this is really the rub between socialism and capitalism. But when we come to how does this impact me today, we want to fast forward. So we no longer have the pension and Social Security and savings. What we have now is we moved. So when Ronald Reagan cut the tax reform from 50 and 70 to 28, that was in 87 that went into effect. Well, the Revenue Act of 78, is where the 401k provision was birthed. It was written into the Revenue Act of 78. It was meant as a corporate tax dodge to highly paid corporate executives. So that actual 401k provision wasn't used at all. Nobody used it. And then it just happened to be that a benefits consultant at an employment benefits group found it and said, hey, I can use this for what I'm proposing. And he used it in his proposal. The client didn't accept it, but the company he worked for did. And that was the birth of the 401k across America. So what happened really in 1981 is the 401k, all of a sudden corporations realized, oh my gosh, I can stop having the guaranteed pension to offer to employees, and instead of me offering a guaranteed amount that I am responsible for covering for these people's and the rest of their lifetime, instead of that massive responsibility on a corporate shoulder, I can transfer all of the obligation and all the responsibility to the individual shoulder, and basically we'll move from a defined benefit, which is the pension. We define your benefit for the rest of your life. It's up to us to deliver it. That's a defined benefit program, to a defined contribution program, which is the 401k, which says we are only going to contribute if you do. If you contribute, there's some employers that contribute with it, regardless if you do or not, but most part, 90+% say we will match what you contribute, and they have some formula for what the match is. We will match 100% the first 5% of your pay you put in. Maybe it's 0.5%, maybe it's 0.25%. So in other words, they left their requirements to maintain your standard of lifestyle with the pension for the rest of your life behind, and they shifted the weight to you as an individual to you contribute first, you pick the investments, we're not responsible for what you're investing in. If the investments fail, that's not our fault, and we're just going to match some kind of formulaic percentage of what you're doing, and that's going to be our contribution to your retirement as you work here. So we left the pension behind, and now we have the Social Security, whatever we've saved, and whatever we've contributed to the 401k. So with the 401k really taking off in 1981, you have to think back to what were the tax rates in 1981. 50 and 70, because this is before the cut of 87 that went into effect. And so at 50%, people are desperate trying to find ways to not pay taxes currently, because nobody wants to work and get paid half of their earnings because of the federal tax. So when the 401k got rolled out in 81, everybody jumped on it. Corporations loved it because it got rid of their pension obligations pretty quickly. And individuals loved it because if they were making a high income, if they were making a decent income, tax rates were outrageous in the 80s because we still hadn't fully appreciated that we were off the gold standard. So we had really high tax rates. And so you saw the 401k sweep across the country starting in 81. It just, oh my gosh, like wildfire. Everyone picked up this 401k. Everyone. It was so rare that it was not something that was picked up on. And so fast forward 5 years from 81 to 86, when Ronald Reagan cuts the top rate from 50 and 70 to 28, and it goes into effect in 87, and how many Americans do you think went and said, oh wow, President Reagan has cut the top tax rate, and now the top tax rate at 28% is the lowest we've had since the 1930 FDR rate of 25%. I am now going to contribute my money after tax. I'm going to take advantage of this 20% rate, and I'm going to pay the taxes now, and I'm going to let that money grow then after tax for the rest of my working career. How many Americans do you think actually took advantage of that? Yeah, not a lot. And so we have become addicted to pre-tax wealth building. And now we have all of this massive wealth built pre-tax. And it's sitting there as a tax time bomb for the government. Because remember, the government has a clear knowledge of how much money is in ERISA qualified plans, and they know how much access to ERISA qualified money they have. So understand that their conventional wisdom was born in 1981 that said, don't pay the tax now while taxes are high. Wait till you retire. You'll be in a lower bracket. Pay the taxes when you're in a lower bracket. That was true in 1981 when the 401k took off like wildfire and the top tax rates were 50 and 70% under Ronald Reagan. That was true. And so the logic initially made sense. But when you get to a point in society where the future projections of your tax rates are so much higher because of the coming tax need, you start to look at your pre-tax money and you ask yourself this question: should I buy out the government from this money? Because now we have the Roth 401k. And the Roth 401k is the last thing that came to our optional arsenal. It came about in 2006, so it is still very, very, very new. But I've seen an explosion of Roth 401k options in the last 3 years of my practice, and I will tell you that we know that this Trump tax top rate of 37% is the lowest we're going to see, because we already know that Biden's top rate is looking closer to 40 before the add-ons. And what we don't know about Biden's plan is how much he's going to squeeze the brackets to force more people into the top or the higher brackets. And so we can't do a lot of planning right now, but all we can do is know that we have this last year of Trump's tax plan with the top rate at 37, and it's a very, very, very wide bracket. So you have to be over 520 something thousand as a single person to be in the top bracket, and you have to be over 650,000 as a married couple, including the standard deduction, to be in the top bracket. So we have a wide breadth of money that we can literally take a strategic advantage of from a tax position and buy the government out now. Why would you want to buy the government out now and take away all that money and take away all that compounding? Remember, the government doesn't want you to know this, but the compounding that you're getting is also compounded and taxed at the future tax rate. So if in 1987 our rate was 28 and we deferred and we're retiring now in 2020, we're paying a higher tax rate than the 28% if we're in the top bracket. Assuming we're still in the top bracket, we're paying 37 versus 28, what we would have paid while we were working. And this is going to be the new story, because the new tax rates that are coming, everything is changing now. You have to understand, nothing has happened like this before in America. We have the first full retirement of a full generation, which is the retirement of the baby boomers. They were born from 46 to 64. 75 million people were born from 46 to 64. This is our first full generation that has worked completely through Social Security and now is retiring onto Social Security and Medicare. Social Security being 1935, Medicare 1965. This is our first full generation that worked our entire lifetimes, and Social Security existed and Medicare was brought about. So this is the apple cart demographic shift that we've been bracing for. It's here. It will last from now until the end of 2030, with most of our boomers, 65 million approximately, have yet to retire. 10 million have already passed or retired. So we've got still 65 million of the 75 million born to yet retire. And those 65 million people, most of them are going to retire between 2022 and 2027. So we know that as these boomers massively retire, which has never happened before in our country's history, we are going to see a shift of how much tax need we need, and that is going to bring up the tax requirements. And the Congressional Budget Office gave us an estimate that the middle class tax code will be somewhere in the 63% range at the retirement of the baby boomers, because we do not have enough people working to maintain and support the people that will be on Social Security. This is coming. This is here. We've been kicking the can down the road. It is here now. And so the question is, should you buy the government out as your silent partner of your retirement account? You buy them out by paying them off. You want to pay them off at the cheapest rate as fast as possible to get them out forever, and then have money that is never accountable or taxable to the government again. Of course, that would be Roth. And as we've been talking about before on this podcast, the tax valued asset class of life insurance, cash value life insurance, which is very special and very customized. So you need to make sure you're doing it with the right person. So that is all we have time for today. Thank you for joining us, Crashes and Taxes, and we will be back next week. Take care, everybody.